Beat Podcast wird euch präsentiert von Tascam.
But I'm really glad we were able to set this up, particularly for this album. Actually, this is more interesting to me to speak about than any of your other albums, precisely because it's so really different. So I would like to start off by just talking about the approach behind the album, the concept you chose for yourself, the idea of limitation and so forth. If that sounds okay to you?
Yeah, so I think I started making tracks probably a couple of months after lockdown in New York. And initially, I mean, it was there wasn't much for me to be doing, so I worked on some erasure stuff. I did that, and then when I finished that, I thought that I'd try something else. And I've had a small piece of Euro rack or a small system for quite a while, but I never really looked into it properly or worked out how to use it or looked into the potential. So then I just started getting obsessed with YouTube tutorial videos on Eurorack modules, and that's really what kicked off the project. I started making drones, and I started experimenting with all of the examples that they would give you in a tutorial on a particular module. And then if it sounded cool, then I'll record it. But it was really just an exercise. It wasn't. I wasn't planning to make a record. I was learning something new. I mean, I did quite a few things during lockdown. I did quite a few history tutorials, and I tried to learn how to do the samba. That didn't work out. But I also, like I say, just started messing about in my studio with these modules.
I was wondering about something which, when I spoke to an experimental musician from Berlin, Ignaz Schick, the other day, and he said that for him it's important that music, if you're really treating it seriously, is part of your daily activities. So it's as natural as making coffee, as natural as doing the dishes. It has to be mundane as well. But at the same time, you don't want it to be too mundane, stay special. So I was wondering if this trying out the Eurorack in this with these limitations you chose is something which also about maybe going outside of routine and going into something unexplored.
I think, I mean, I certainly needed something to do, I mean, everybody did. We were all bored shitless, and I had a studio in Brooklyn, and well before COVID, I would spend, hours and hours and hours down there making music. It's just part of my life, it's what I do really. And it's just in this instance, it wasn't for a cause particularly. I mean, I don't know about mundane. I don't think it's. I don't think making music is ever mundane. I mean, I love it. I mean, I've got the best job in the world. I really do. I mean, I've got it's like being in a toy shop. And especially when you don't have the when you're not working to a particular format, like as in a pop song, you're not working with choruses and verses and bridges or that kind of traditional arrangement. The sky's the limit. You can kind of do what you like, and that's the real joy of it. I mean, I like the process more than I do the release.
Yeah, I think most musicians would agree with that. Yeah. I mean. But you said that there was never a release planned, which is really interesting because these pieces sound so as though they're like when I listened to the album, it was really like they're corresponding with each other. There's a very strong sense of unity between them.
Yeah. Well, they were because all of the tracks started in the same way. You know, they all started with one single sound, one single drone. You know, originally each of the tracks. I mean, I had more than I think I did 15 or 18 tracks, but they all started with one sound, and then each track then was coloured. You know, I started introducing new elements into a track, possibly a little bit of a sample somewhere along the line. On one of the tracks, Black Leg, you know, I had this recording of an old folk song from the 40s or 30s, I think, and incorporated that into the song. So they kind of built up that way. But there is. I mean, obviously, there's a connection between all the tracks just because the nature of the arrangements, I think.
Why did you put in the limitation of staying within one root note? I think of all the limitations, that one's the most interesting to me.
Well, yeah, just because I always wondered how people managed to make this type of music, if whatever this type of music is, interesting. You know, to sustain interest. I mean, none of the songs are 8 minutes long because after about 4 minutes, then I start losing interest. So really, the challenge was to introduce elements at various stages through the track, or for sounds to develop throughout the track, so that I was still interested in hearing them. And to start introducing chord changes, then it would be bringing it back to what I do already. You know, what I've done already, which is making choruses and verses.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, as a songwriter, not being able to change the harmonies, that is probably the hardest job of all.
It's a challenge. You know, it's a challenge just because you still want it to be interesting and powerful. But I discovered that you can do that with sound during this whole process.
So are these pieces, are they edited down from longer sessions, or is it, as you said, you just you started with a sequence, explored it, and then when you lost interest, that's when it cuts?
Yeah. No, they're actually extended. They started from the almost shorter. They were all 3 minutes long. That was another thing I thought, so I'm going to try and do them all. But then I don't know why I just got drawn into the whole process, and so I extended most of them because I could, and for over on the 4th minute, it would still be interesting to listen to.
I think some of these probably could have gone on for longer, but maybe that's because I actually love to listen to this kind of music, like drone music. Also, this like the sequencing, it has a sort of a delicate crowd vibe to it. And obviously, some of those pieces went on for much longer.
Yeah, but I didn't want to then suddenly, it was. I think actually the tracks with the sequences in were the hardest to do, because then it was really tempting to just start putting hi-hats and claps and snares and snare fills in. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted, as I say, I mean, you're always trying to do something different every time that you make a new record or do a new song, trying to discover something new. So I managed to avoid those pitfalls of suddenly going into a dance, for the track suddenly to be a dance track or something, So.
Yeah. If you compare the challenges of this one to, for example, challenges of recording something like Chorus, where you didn't actually, I think, work with polyphonic chords and stuff. Which one was the more challenging project, would you say?
Probably the chorus. Yeah, recording chorus was probably a little more challenging, but again, it was a real joy to do. You know, just because we had these like little rules, it made no difference to the pleasure I got out doing it, and also there's a certain amount of satisfaction. You can go, okay, the producer might say, well, why don't you introduce a piano chord into the chorus here? And I would say, no, let's try and achieve that sound, or that effect by using just monophonic synthesizers. So, you know, they were both very, very satisfying to do. I mean, but I'm not saying this is easy to do, because you really have to, you know, something like this. You know, I'm listening to the same thing over and
Yes.
over and over again for hours and hours and hours. You know, eventually the cat leaves. It's just me. And but I didn't mind that. I just you know, I really didn't mind it. It was a bit of an escapism as well for me, because
Mhm.
you know, my personal life situation wasn't, or at home, our home situation wasn't great, and so it really took me out of all of that. You know, doing this.
So the title "Songs of Silence," it doesn't mean the songs are about silence, but it's sort of searching for a state of silence.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's quite an obvious title, really, isn't it? I mean, all of the song titles and the album titles came afterwards. Once I learned that the record company were interested in actually releasing it, then that's when I had to come up with titles. And I guess Songs of Silence, I just mean, you know, there's no singing. Simple as that.
Um, I think one of the things which is interesting to me is that I think I've watched a few interviews and read a few interviews with you, and the Eurorack has come up again and again. So it has to have been sort of a project you've been thinking about maybe for a while. But one thing we've kept mentioning is that you love to be surprised by the machines. And I just wonder if you're spending so much time with the modules as part of this project, how can you keep up the surprise if you're actually getting to know the machine so intimately?
Because with I mean, you know, I've got lots of modular synthesizers, and most of my modular synthesizers work in the same way. It's the same principle. It's basically a VCO, VCF, and a VCA.
Yes.
Modulated by an envelope. But with these new Eurorack modules, there are so many ways to modulate those sounds. So many, you know, it's crazy. And I think it would be very difficult for me to get to know all of those modules that well. And you know, I mean, like I said, I watched lots and lots of tutorials, but even that, I didn't really even scrape the bottom of the barrel. I mean, you know, there's tons more stuff, and it's not a case of I'm thinking, oh, I must buy more modules. I mean, I still don't really fully understand the ones I have here, you know. So with old modular stuff, you know, you've got, you know, a Roland's 700 system and a Moog system, but they basically mechanically, physically work the same. With this stuff, I mean, you know, it's just crazy. I mean, you know, and the great thing about all modular synthesizers is that you can plug anything into anything.
Yeah.
And there is no, like, there are inputs and outputs, but it doesn't really matter. You can't really fuck up, you know, you can't mess it out. And then sometimes you come up, something will happen and it'll be wow, you know. As long as you don't start messing about with the electrics at the back, you know, that's when it's a problem.
So sort of the complexity of the system, even in a relatively simple state, already sort of precludes you ever solving the mystery behind it in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, I've got, it's not a big modular system, but I have, you know, there's enough there. And some of the modules, it's super complex, you know, and you know, you got a tutorial, but on one modular, there's not one tutorial. There might be 5 tutorials, each going through different levels of what you can do with this particular module. I mean, you know, it's just incredible. And I love watching people do it on YouTube. You know, I really do. When they, you know, it's you know, there's people on there that demo this stuff, and like they seem to me that they are super knowledgeable.
Yeah.
You know, and they really do know these modules inside out, and they're not necessarily the people that are selling it either. They're people that are reviewing it. I mean, I love that. You know.
See, there was actually, I don't know if you were at Super Booth this year, but they extended the event by one day, and they had an event for children. Um, so they had different tryouts where children could play with drum machines, synthesizers, and they actually had they built a carousel, a sort of a display thing with I think 6 modulars, where children could just connect wires. I think sort of I can see why that works, because it's such a playful and never-ending idea of working with sound.
Yes, it is. And it's good that they catch them young as well, because once kids turn 16, 18, then they'll get into soft synths and they can't be like my son can't be bothered. You know, he's just not at all interested in anything analog. You know, he goes, "Why would I do that? I've got it on my computer." You know. So it's good that they catch them very young. That's great. We had actually my son's school, his music department. They wanted me to. I did like a short talk and a short tour of my studio. This was before COVID happened, and you know, we took a camera around the studio and showed people, kids, various bits and bobs. But you knew that they were too old for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, they're not. Why would they care about a 1978 ARP 2500? I mean, it means nothing, you know. When you can get all these wonderful sounds with soft synthesizers on their phone.
Yeah, I mean, I saw there's a presentation by Frank Wiedemann of ARM and Inner Visions, and so it was very, very impressive. He just took an old organ and ran it through different digital effects, and then at the end the sound was completely changed, and it was something really electronic sounding. And so the point he was making is it doesn't matter what you use as a sound source; it just matters how you treat it. I just think, on the other hand, there is when you spend so much time with music, there is a relationship you build with your tools, and I think that relationship, just as it is with physical, like sound carriers, like vinyl or CD, there is a stronger connection to physical objects we have as physical beings. So even though I was impressed by the demonstration, I also thought, I don't know, I think I don't see myself being interested in recording just with an old organ and running it through effects to get the sounds I want.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there is something wonderful about the physicality of modular synthesizers in particular. You know, using 2 hands rather than 1 hand with the mouse.
Yeah.
In my son's case, it's his finger. Whatever he uses, I don't know what he uses anymore. But
you know, with books, it's the same. You can hold a book in 2 hands.
But yeah, I that's something that I discovered years and years ago. It's and you know, the unpredictability of everything as well, especially with I mean, there are very few modules in Eurorack that have a memory. So no matter what you do, invariably you're going to come up with something slightly different from what you did before, which is why I'm very jealous. Not jealous. I'm astounded when people take this stuff on the road, do performances. You know, because I would just be panicking, thinking, well, you know, that sound. Where is that? How am I going to recreate that? Why is it? How's it not going to be too loud? Or, you know, people do it. My guy that runs a record company does it. It's his band called Sunroof. They go on the road, and that's all live Eurorack. And you know, I think they're so impressive.
Even though I probably one of the strongest memories I have of your music is the video for Chorus, where you're actually using the modular on the beach. I thought that was really something that stuck with me.
I think it was an old. I don't think it was an actual modular synthesizer. I think it was an old telephone exchange.
Okay. What did you fill the Eurorack with for this album? What kind of modules were you using?
It's just there. Let me have a look.
That's great.
I'll shout them over.
Ah, great. Okay.
Okay. There's a wire oscillator, zero oscillator, cycle box,
Mm-hmm.
braids. Oh, which one is that? Mutable, yeah, braids. Musical instruments. I've got a cloud generator from synthesis technology. There's a Macbeth filter, a Dalek modulator,
Okay.
the Russian filter, which is in Russian, so I can't tell you what that is exactly. I had the Rene sequencer, the Verbos electronic harmonic oscillator. I've got the MMS spectral multiband resonator. There's a sound hack, what's that one called? Enerver, the reverb unit, and they also do an echo fog, an echo unit. Anyway, that's some of them. That's some of them. I've got a couple of also got a couple of, there's all the utility modules as well, like for patching and there's a couple of Roland. We've got a couple of Roland envelopes, which I really like.
Yeah, there's. I think that's the beauty of this this idea of the Eurorack. It's really an environment, and you can fill it with whatever you want to fill it, and make it your own.
You can. I mean, it's great because in an ideal world, before Eurorack, then you'd have had someone would have built a modular system with a VCO coming from a Moog, a filter that's, I don't know, was maybe an ARP filter, 26 filter, envelopes that came out of a Pro One, definitely, because they're the best envelopes in the world, and but that's what's actually happened, isn't it? And I love the fact that these companies, it's all in one format, so you've got these little tiny companies who are making these modules, maybe not that many modules in their garages, coming up with really interesting ideas. I mean, and then you can cross all this stuff together. It's lovely. It's a wonderful new thing, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to use maybe the last part of the interview to talk a bit about sound specifically, because to me, I think in this day and age, as you said, there's YouTube tutorials for everything. Basically, you've granted other people access to your studio. There was videos of where you actually show your gear, so everyone could buy Vince Clarke's gear if they wanted to. But I still think it's impossible to copy this. I think there is something, unique and personal about your sound, the sound worlds you're building. So there has to be something which goes beyond the gear and even maybe beyond the processes. So I may be just curious just to explore this a little bit, and because you always said you were drawn into music mainly by songs, folk songs, even at the beginning. Yeah. But do you have any memories of sound, early memories of sound as well, that you would, because your music seems to be so much about sound in a way that it's hard to believe there wasn't anything before that.
Well, I think that probably before, well, maybe the same. No, I think before Depeche Mode, when the second Human League album came out, and that to me, that was like that. Suddenly there were these sounds I'd never heard before.
Yeah,
and they were making sound. They weren't using drum kits. They weren't. Everything was like this really amazing synthesized effect. It was completely unique. I mean, you can't. Punk rock wasn't particularly unique as regards to sound. No. It's the same old thing, really. Just played a bit faster with attitude. Not that I don't like it, but when suddenly these early synthesizer bands started appearing, this is a sound you've never heard before. It wasn't a recreation of anything, and that's what really drew me in. I love the idea of drum sounds without a drummer, for instance.
Yes.
You know, even better to make drum sounds without a drum machine. That's even more interesting to me. You know, just because in the case of rhythm, for instance, it's fulfilling a function. And you don't necessarily have to go down the traditional route or the traditional sound route for something to be rhythmical and groovy. You know, you could be anything. You know, it could be people, it could be absolute living. And you can obviously with sampling, and then you can sample shit. Something that really isn't percussive or drum-like suddenly becomes a groove, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. I was reading these, as I said, I was reading a few interviews, and there was one where you were talking about your influences, and it says, "The Dark Side of the Moon is your favorite album of all time. It still sounds amazing. The trick of the tail, I couldn't believe the sound of it." So there's all these reference to the music, but it's always about the sound. And I think that's interesting, because these are obviously great albums, like really well written songs, but it's the sound which is sort of appealing. I think it often gets forgotten in this, how important this sound is. How, yeah.
Well, especially with Dark Side of the Moon, because it's so timeless. And you buy now, and it's still, you play it now on a vinyl, and it still sounds super modern.
Yeah. You've spoken in the press release about the change. You're still impressed by the change that can happen in sound, but just changing a few parameters a little bit, by changing the dial. When we change from a major key to a minor key, so there is an emotional change. What do you think changes when we do that with sound? Like just a small filter change. Is that comparable? Is that different?
No, I think that's different. I think that's a different kind of emotion. Yeah. You know, when you start messing about with chords or playing with chords, I think that's a different part of your brain reacting to that. Sound is like, for me anyway, you know, it's like you've got this one painting and all it is just red.
Yeah.
And right in the corner there's like someone who's got a paintbrush and just did a splodge of yellow. And suddenly that's the change, you know. And you go, oh wow! And suddenly that little yellow splodge suddenly, you know, the painting makes sense. I love that, you know. There's just keeping it interest, really, you know, over a period of time with sound, I think.
Do you have synesthesia?
Yes, I'm looking at it now. Actually, that's funny. Why do you say that?
Because, well, so for example, this album, it's made with a very limited sound palette, and the cover is all black and white. And for example, the album I Say, the cover of that album looks like the sound palette to me. I have a different kind of synesthesia, not so much color, but I can sort of relate to the color thing. And I always thought the covers of Erasure, there was a connection to the music for me.
Well, I think that probably, I mean, you know, the artwork for Erasure has always been quite kind of up, you know, and bright and uplifting, and you know, perhaps a little whimsical as well.
Yeah,
I mean, that's why I went down this other route for the artwork for this particular record. You know, I wanted something completely the opposite to that.
Yeah. So, but the synesthesia, that's a color thing. You would see a certain color connected to a certain sound, a tone.
Yeah, sometimes, you know, yeah. I mean, you know, I've got a little bit of tinnitus in one ear, and I live in New York, so there's never any silence here. You know, even we have very good windows here, but there's never any silence. So now, the thing that really affects my head the most is when I suddenly don't hear anything at all. Like if I go, we used to have a place in Maine, which is in the countryside, really. But when we used to stay there, I was always astounded at how quiet it was, and that would really get my brain working. That would be very, very strange, and it would take a few days to get used to.
Yeah.
Just because 99.9% of the time there's sound all the time going into your head until you leave that. I mean, you live in the city, so you know what I'm talking about,
Absolutely.
But when it suddenly disappears, I'd love to try to visit one of those. Are they called anechoic chambers?
Yes.
Those chambers where everything is complete. I'd love to just. I'm sure it would freak me out, but at the same time,
It's supposed to be horrific.
Yeah, I'd love to experience it though.
I had something similar more with visual stimuli. I was outside of Munich in the countryside once, and it was really far away from the city, and it was in the night. It got completely dark. It got completely dark. So there's no light pollution in whatsoever, and then you pull down the blinds, and then you're suddenly in a room which you cannot see anything. That was sort of the visual equivalent, and it was frightening.
Yes. Yeah, I've been to a few events in Maine when we lived there, and we lived in, like I say, we lived in the woods somewhere, and when there was no stars or no moon, and I was drunk, it was often a big problem, to get home.
Yeah. So I think we're through with time, but I wanted to maybe just close off with one question, which I'm interested in is so this idea of what kind of sounds you feel you're drawn to, because regardless of the projects you've done, there is, as I said, I think, at least to me, there's always been a sort of there's been aspects where I could say this sounds like you, and to me, what is different about your take on electronic music is that today many artists are very, very they care about trying to make something which feels organic, or when using field recording, something which relates to something else outside of music. And to me, I always thought that for you, electronic music was this. There's an otherness in your sounds, the sounds you're drawn to. There's an otherness. It's not like if there's a guitar on this album, you'll just have someone play a guitar. But the electronic sounds are really different. They're not relatable so much. But I thought it was an otherness which is sort of inviting and welcoming, which is really hard to create. There's something like Silver Apples of the Moon by Morten Subotnick that also has the otherness, but it's not very inviting. Is that something you can relate to, the sort of electronic music as a sort of, as you said, in this world you can create yourself and go to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm drawn to that. I am drawn to electronic music. I mean, I have been for years and years and years, and not that we haven't used, outside sources, organic sources, guitars and the like.
Yeah.
But we've only ever really used them as like the little tiny highlights or events. They've never been the mainstay of the track or the song. And see, to me, because I mean, maybe to people that maybe to kids or something, they listen to a record like this and they think, oh, well, it's just more synthesizers, or they don't know what it is, and they've heard this sound before. But see, I'm still fascinated by it all.
Yeah.
I still, I love the fact that it isn't real at all. I love the unrealness of it.
Yeah.
It's and it's a landscape that's constantly changing. You can only do so much, for instance, with a guitar. I mean, I guess with a violin, you can put it through so many effects, like you said earlier. But after that, whereas this stuff, it's just endless.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot, Vince. A beautiful album.
Thank you very much. You're very kind.
And all the best.
Yes. Okay. You take care and have stay cool.
I'll try.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.
Bye-bye.